7:30 exactly. So thank you all for coming. We're going to start right on the dot because Ernest has shot too many movies, and videos and TV and a lot of stuff, so that we managed to cover everything. And I hope that you will stay with us. There's going to be a reception right after this event. So my name is Vlad Nikolic. I'm also a filmmaker. I'm a professor here at the New School in the School of Media Studies and currently serving as the Dean of the School of Media Studies. And this is our Hirshon Artists-in-Residence program, which is an annual program where we bring distinguished filmmakers to do masterclasses and public events that has been sponsored by Dorothy Hirshon, who is a lifelong trustee here at the New School. And it's a great pleasure to have Ernest Dickerson here, distinguished filmmaker, cinematographer, and we'll talk about his work. And we'll start with just looking at what we call in the business a sizzle reel of some of the amazing stuff he has done.
I got to give a shout out to my wife who produced that. So unfortunately. So thank you for coming.
So we covered this yesterday a little bit in the masterclass, but I think it's worth repeating. Why did you become a cinematographer first before becoming a director?
Well, my first love was cinematography. It still is cinematography. I still love it. Ever since I picked up a camera for the first time, a still camera, I've been in love with capturing images, creating images. People ask me, people sometimes say to me, you know, hey, are you a musician? What instrument do you play? And I say, I play a camera. And so, you know, I fell in love with cinematography, you know, because I grew up watching movies. Movies was always part of my family viewing, and growing up in Newark, New Jersey, in the 50s and the 60s, Sundays, you know, and sometimes even Saturdays, you know, were days to go to the movies, especially if it was raining, we couldn't play outside. But Sunday evening, we would always go downtown Newark and see, you know, some of the newest films that were out. But I grew up watching movies, and I was always fascinated by why certain films looked the way they did. And I wasn't aware of, at a younger age, I wasn't aware of photography in relationship to movies yet. My uncle, who was the first guy to put a camera in my hands, my Uncle Daoud, he was an artist in residence at Wesleyan University for a couple of years, and he started dabbling in black and white photography. And when he'd come over our house, he would bring these beautiful black and white prints that he did. And I was just amazed at him. And he turned me on to so many movies. We'd sit up late at night and watch old movies and stuff, and he just hit me to so many movies. And I always wondered why certain movies looked the way they did. And I didn't know. What it was, was it the set design? I didn't know. Some movies fascinated me, some movies not so much. But one night we were watching one of those movies, and it was David Lean's Oliver Twist that he did in 1948, beautiful black and white, photographed by Guy Green. And in the opening scenes, Oliver's mother is in labor with him walking across the moors as storm clouds are coming up over skeletal trees. There's a storm rising, and she's going through the pain and the images of, you know, as she feels the shooting pain, it cuts to like these thorn bushes, you know. And I'm looking at this, and this is one of those movies, and my uncle just happened to say, damn, this photography is amazing. And then it hit me. You know, it's just like one of those things that's been staring you in the face all your life, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh, okay, movies are photographed. There's a guy called the director of photography, so that's what he does. So I started looking at movies in a different way. Probably about a week later, I went to the movies to see In Cold Blood, the original In Cold Blood, photographed by the late, great Conrad Hall. Amazing black and white photography. And that just boosted me even further. So that started my love of cinematography. And But I didn't take it seriously for a while because I did my undergraduate work in architecture. I went to Howard University School of Architecture, did the 5-year program. But while I was there, I wound up taking a minor in color photographic illustration. I always had a part-time job, but in the 70s in DC, I tried to get a job in an architect's office as a draftsman, but the Nixon administration was in office then, so building industry was at an all-time low. So I could, so I was going in, try and get a job as maybe an assistant draftsman or something. They said, yeah, we can hire you, but we can't pay you anything. Well, that didn't work. And the work that I wound up getting was as a photographer on the Hilltop School newspaper. And it just so happened that the editor of the paper, a gentleman by the name of Zeke Mobley, wanted to make the paper kind of like Life magazine. He wanted it to be heavily dependent upon the photography section. And so the day that I went in, there was nobody in the office. And then this report came down that they needed a photographer to go down and photograph a Senate hearing that Ted Kennedy was commanding at that moment. The story was there were 2 African-American girls from Alabama, the Rolfe twins, who went for just a routine medical checkup. And while they were there, the doctor said, oh, while you're here, I'll sterilize you. And it turned out he had been doing this to a whole lot of young black girls, a whole lot of young sisters. And so, their parents, found out about it. They took it to the Senate. And so I had my camera with me. I went down there. I was jostling, with all the news photographers and wound up getting 2 front page photographs, one a close-up of Ted Kennedy and the other one of the parents. And so that's another place where I learned photography, shooting for the Hilltop newspaper. So all the work I wound up getting was photographic. Went from there to the Moreland Spingarn Research Center, doing archival photography, and then my last year in architectural school, because I was still there, I got a part-time job at the medical school doing medical photography. So what does that mean? Yeah, well, they didn't let me go into surgery right away. They let me just develop the film for a while, but eventually, I stayed for a couple of years until I decided to just get out of there and go to film school. But I was in surgery like sometimes 2 to 3 times a week, shooting operations and shooting clinical. And I think what really pushed me to just say, I need to get out of here, I was shooting a series of leg amputations. There were people that, diabetics, who had impaired circulation to the lower extremity. So a lot of people had gangrene. So and these were used for training slides that doctors were using to test the different types of bone saws, the different ways of cutting the leg off and everything. And so, I'm in the OR shooting over the surgeon's shoulder, and the leg comes off, and I'm shooting, but I keep looking at that leg sitting in the corner in a plastic bag before it goes to pathology, And I said, okay. And I wound up doing a whole bunch of those. And I just said, okay, I got to get out of here. So I was in love with film. The 2 guys that I was working with were big film buffs. We were all film buffs. We'd go see movies every night, every other night, and saw a whole lot of films, and really had a conversation with myself. I had to sit down and say, what do I really want to spend the rest of my life doing? And I was happy to do architecture, but I didn't see myself doing that for the rest of my life. Even though people say, how did I make the transition? It actually helped me, because doing architecture really structured my thinking, and it trained me in pre-visualization, because that's what it is. You have a problem that you have to solve, and you've got to visualize it first before you can do it. And architecture helped me do that. So when I got into filmmaking, when I went to NYU graduate film school, it was kind of cool. I went as a cinematography major, and I was at an advantage because I knew photography. I knew photochemistry. I knew lenses. Everybody else was freaking out when they saw the lenses. As soon as they saw all the numbers on the lens barrels, they freaked out. But for me, it was just I knew photography, so it was kind of easy for me. So I put myself in a position to either write and direct my own films, which NYU was good for, or I photographed other people's films. And first day there, I met Spike Lee. You know, there weren't too many black kids there. It was me and Spike and a couple of others. But he found out I went to Howard. I found out he went to Morehouse. We started ragging on each other's schools. But then, you know, the conversation got into what we were really there for. And that's how that kind of started. So,
Great, thank you. So that was a great segue into the first clip, which is from She's Gotta Have It. So let's watch the clip, and then you can tell us a little bit about how this film came about. So this was 1986, very, very different than today in terms of the films that were out there and what was going on. So how did this, and tell us about the film and how did it happen and how did you and Spike collaborate on it?
well, at NYU, I shot Spike's graduate thesis film, Joe's Bed-Stuy Barbershop. We cut heads. And that got me my first film as a director of photography, which I didn't put up here because there's no good copies of it out. You know, hopefully that'll change soon. But that was a movie called Brother from Another Planet. And so that was my first film. And then I started working. And Spike and I stayed in touch, even though we had graduated from the school. And he tried to get another film off the ground. And actually, I started working on a TV series called Tales from the Dark Side. It was an anthology horror show that shot here, and some crews here and crews in Los Angeles, and I was one of the cinematographers here. And I was going to be on Tales from the Dark Side, so I said, nah, I can't do it. So that show that he was going to do fell through, and the funding fell through at the last second. And so he was stuck. What am I going to do? And he didn't want to sit around waiting for another couple of years to get the funding. He wrote She's Gotta Have It in 2 weeks. Wrote it in 2 weeks. Called me up because I just got off of Tales from the Dark Side. Because from Tales from the Dark Side, I went on to a movie called Crush Groove, which was one of the rap musicals from back in the day. My first union job. And then, so that left me wide open to do She's Gotta Have It. Spike said, okay, I'm going to do She's Gotta Have It. Are you available? I said, yeah. So, you know, we were sometimes going to the movies together. And we were looking at movies, and you know, those were the days, the glorious days of HBO, when you had good movies showing on HBO, you know. That was like the early days of that stuff. And so a couple of movies, while we were in film school, one of our favorite films was Raging Bull. Scorsese was to us, was the greatest director, and he really influenced Spike and me. And so Raging Bull was playing on HBO, and also Francis Coppola's Rumblefish was playing on HBO. And so when we were discussing She's Gotta Have It, we decided, hey, let's shoot it in black and white. Okay. And, you know, then Spike said, you know, but it's interesting. I don't know where the idea came from, because there's a sequence in the middle of She's Gotta Have It that's color, which is kind of like a fantasy sequence. And, you know, so we, a little bit of inspired by what Coppola did with Rumblefish, because it's black and white, but there's a sequence with the fish, and the fish are in color. And he did that in a very low-tech way. But so we decided to shoot this. We shot it in 12 days. Shot She's Gotta Have It in 2 6-day weeks. I think it was in the middle of July. It was hot as hell. We were shooting underneath the Brooklyn Bridge, the Manhattan Bridge. That's why in the breast shot, you hear that buzzing that sounds like bees in the background. That's actually the traffic going over the bridge that was right above the loft that we were shooting in. And Spike had to play that character because he didn't intend to. It was originally going to be another actor, a real actor, who was going to play Morris Blackman. But about a week before we started shooting, he got a real movie. Revenge of the Nerds Part 2. So he did that. So Spike was like, oh man, what am I going to do? I got nobody that can play this role. What am I going to do? And he figured, okay, well, nobody knows this character better than me, so he decided he should play it, and that's what he did. And it was kind of like a Faustian bargain, because every film that he did after that for quite a while, part of his deal was that he had to act in the film. That's why he's acts in so many films. He did not want to be an actor. But so we shot it in 2 6-day weeks. I think we shot it with $2,000 in hand. We everything was deferred because a place called TCS, Technological Cinevideo Services, who used to service the cameras at NYU. Spike and I were both, technical assistants in the equipment room there, so we knew TCS. We had a good relationship with them. And Carl Scheidinger, who ran the company, he gave us a deal on the cameras. And so, now this was film. I know a lot of the students here are from the digital world. This is film. And so this was shot in Super 16. Now, Super 16 is a larger 16 millimeter frame. If you know film gauges, you got 16, you got 35, you got 65, and you got, IMAX is 65 anyway. But we shot this in Super 16. Why Super 16 and what does that mean? Film usually has the sprocket holes on both sides. Super 16 only has the sprocket holes on one side. So that means the other film area that's there means you get a bigger picture area, because we were going to have to blow this up to 35 millimeter for a theatrical release. So you want to get the best possible image quality in the original photography to allow you to do that. Because if it's too small and the blow up is too big, the grain is just going to pop, and the image is going to fall apart. So we shot Super 16, and it premiered at the San Francisco Film Festival. And Spike called me the next day. He was in San Francisco, and he said the movie started showing, and about 5 minutes into the movie, there was a citywide blackout. And it stopped dead. And he was scared to death. And after about 15, 20 minutes, power came back on, the movie started. He said nobody had left the theater. And then, I guess the rest is history, I guess.
Yeah, I just want to add, this is why I said 86, because at that time, this was really a totally different film than what was out there. I mean, and you mentioned John Sayles and, this whole movement of the independent film of the 80s. And you and Spike definitely with this film, it kind of moved the boundaries. It was, the gender reverse role in the film, right, in terms of, and the dating scene and so on. And it was kind of this is what kind of broke out. Also, the critics hailed it, etc. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it did very well critically, and it did pretty good. I think the total budget on the film was probably like $35,000 or something like that. It was it was. I don't know if there's, when we had to move from one place to another, we had what was called rent-a-wreck. Do they still have rent-a-wrecks here? We had a rent-a-wreck. We had a van that was all beat up, and we would put our equipment in it and go to like the next location. Or sometimes we would I'd put the camera on my shoulder, my assistant would put the tripod on her shoulder, and we'd just like walk a couple of blocks, so it was that kind of a movie, but we got it done.
It looks beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
So brings us to the next one, which was an even bigger splash, which is Do the Right Thing. So let's take a look at the clip, and then we'll talk about that.
So the late, great Ossie Davis, the late, great Frank Vincent, and that was Danny Aiello's son, who played one of the officers. He's gone too. So time passes and things change.
So I assume everybody has seen the film. So you said yesterday in the masterclass a lot of interesting things about how you shot it, and how you were dealing with the color and the heat to produce this type of feel of heat on camera.
Well, that was when Spike was writing the script. That was the first thing. I remember we were flying on a plane from New York to L.A. We were going to do the color timing on school days, and he started writing the script longhand on legal pad. That's the way I write too. I can't type and think at the same time. My daughter knows that. And at the time it was called Heat Wave, and he said he wanted me to think of visually how to get the feeling of heat across to the audience. And so, okay, I started thinking about it. And the first approach that I came up with was color, because I've always been interested in the psychology of color. And little things, finding out things like on submarines, they keep the colors in the cool range, blues, greens, grays, which are kind of calming colors, because you don't want agitated people in a submarine for months, So the interiors of the submarines are painted those colors, because yellows, reds, red actually increases the heart rate. Yellows, reds, oranges, they agitate. So first thing I came up with was to try and limit the color palette as much as possible to warmer colors. And so I was brought on for a month of pre-production, which was kind of like a luxury, because I had a chance to lay down some ground rules, because one of the biggest problems was that the story takes place in one day. Yes, it's the hottest day of the summer, but it takes place in one day. So we're going to be shooting in one location for 8 weeks in Brooklyn, in Bed-Stuy. And New York weather, how the weather changes. So how am I going to make 8 weeks look like one day? And so the first thing I said is, okay, whatever block we pick, the street has to run north and south, because as the sun travels from east to west, one side of the street is always going to be shaded. So it's easier for me to make a cloudy day look like the shaded side of the street. And so that was one of the things that we did. And then I knew I was going to have to create sunlight, and just trying to figure out what's the best way to create sunlight. And at that time, HMI lights were really big, if any of the guys know about HMIs. But I didn't think it gave us a true approximation of sunlight. And so I went to the old-fashioned Brute arcs, big Brute arc lamps that they used to use in the old Hollywood movies. Big lamps. And most of the electrical crew didn't know how to use it. My gaffer, Charles Houston, had to train his people how to use Brutes. Because I knew I was going to probably be in a situation where I had to create sunlight. And I'm glad I did, because the first 2 weeks it just rained, and we're trying to make a hot, bright summer, sunny day. So I wound up having a formula for creating a sunny day in the middle of the rainstorm. So if you see the movie again, the first scene, we got the kids hanging on the stoop, and it's actually the shot that introduces Radio Raheem. So when we're shooting into the building, I was able to use my sunlight formula to make it look like a sunlit day. And then all of a sudden Radio Raheem appears, and the camera whips around to a close-up of Radio Raheem. Well, if you look at it, a really good copy on Blu-ray or 4K, if you look behind Radio Raheem, it's raining. Because I couldn't do nothing about that. All I could do was just keep the shallow focus and just keep it on his face and, put sunlight on him. But, it was across the street, and everything else. So, and the great thing about it, we shot 8 weeks in one location, that one block. Wynn Thomas built the pizza parlor, knowing that it was going to have to be burnt down at the end. And he and his crew, they actually did repair work on the block. While, before we started shooting there, the art department really, did some, because some of the houses were really kind of in disrepair. So they fixed them up a little bit. And the interiors were shot in some of the apartments there. And so it was, and for the 8 weeks we were shooting, and before that, when the crews were setting up, and after that, when the crews were breaking it down, we had the safest neighborhood in Bed-Stuy, because we had a security force, the X-Men, the Nation of Islam security force, the X-Men, were our security, and nobody, excuse my French, nobody fucked with them. So it was pretty good.
Thank you. I also, this is interesting. We'll take a look now at the next film, which is Mo Better Blues. And I just wanted to say this is, the first film we saw was black and white. This one is what we call high color contrast, obviously, because, distinct colors that you see, the red, like you talked about, the yellow and so on, and more Better Blues, which looks different. So let's look at Mo Better Blues, and I wanted you to talk about like your approach to different films and subject matters.
So, Mo Better Blues.
I just wanted to say, in terms of all three films have very distinct looks, and so how do you, in terms of both the color, but it's also the framing and the types of lenses you use seem a little different. So I don't know, how do you talk? I mean, all of these films you work together with Spike. So how do you discuss and come up with the look for each of the films?
Well, we definitely wanted kind of like a heightened romantic realist look for this, because there is a love story involved, actually two love stories, because one of central conflicts is Bleak has two ladies, and the conflict comes from there. They run into each other. And so, but I think the look came out of a love of jazz. I grew up with jazz. Spike grew up with jazz. His father was a great jazz bassist who actually did the score for the film. And just trying to show the world of the modern jazz musician in a romantic way. And Wynn Thomas designed that beautiful set, the Beneath the Underdog set, and we were able to do so many things in it. I'm so happy that I was able to get that, because Spike and I fell in love with long takes a long time ago. We like to have to cut in a scene only when we have to. And I think actors really appreciate it when they have a long take where they don't have to worry about cutting, and they can just go with it. And that's why we're able to take the band from the stage, walking all the way back, all on Steadicam, and into the dressing room. And we just stayed on them. It was partially scripted, partially improvised. The guys, they really hit it off. And so just trying to get the mood of that club. And I was definitely influenced by a lot of jazz photography. I remember I grew up, my house had, albums, Impulse, and, I grew up listening to the music of Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Sonny Rollins. And there was a book that I got years ago called Jazz Street by Stock. I forget his first name, but it was black and white, but it was black and white photographs of jazz musicians on stage and backstage. And we weren't going to do this in black and white, but I wanted to get the same feeling that I got from those photographs in color. So, whenever putting a film together, I always look at either movies or books of photography. I'll spend hours in an art bookstore, looking for some good photography that, that I might want to keep. I got a library at home. So every cinematographer, I say, when you're planning a look, look at photography, look at photographs, look at old movies, look at new movies, look at all kinds of movies, anything that's going to help get your juices flowing.
I'm going to get us to the next one now, which is Malcolm X. Was that the biggest movie you did up to that point?
Yeah.
And it's also about a historical... Well, let's watch the clip first, and then we'll talk about it. So, how was this different to do this film compared to your other work, given that it's biographical, that it's such a big subject, and all the rest?
Well, when Spike and I first met, first day at NYU, and after we were ragging on each other's schools, we started talking serious about what we were there for. And we were talking about our dreams. What movies did we want to make? And we both had read Malcolm's autobiography, and we both wanted to adapt it to film. And years later, I had already directed my first film, Juice. So while I was shooting Juice, Thank you. While I was shooting Juice, Spike campaigned to get Malcolm X. And even though I had directed my first film, I wasn't going to let anybody else shoot Malcolm X. And so I did something that I don't know if that many people do. After I was a director, then I went back and became a cinematographer on this film. And it was big. It was a 3.5-hour film. We had to fight. It's still a low-budget movie. The total budget was like $35 million, which is like chump change today. But we just, tried to make the best film we could. And the pressure was on us because we had to do it right. The thing that I wanted to do was, there had been so much disinformation about Malcolm, who he was, his life, and everything else. And the thing I wanted to do was to show the world who Malcolm X was. And so I wanted to portray Malcolm's life as a journey. And so the different phases of his life, from the 1930s and the 1940s when he was a gangster, I had one color style. When he was in prison, I had another color style. When he got out of prison and joined the Nation of Islam and actually first met the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, I had another color style. And then for the Hajj to Mecca, a different style. And each time I was using different filters, nets on the front of the lens. I would go to Bloomingdale's and buy Christian Dior black orchid stockings. And I get the biggest size I could find, and I would have my assistant, cut them and stretch them out on a frame so I could frame them, put them in front of the camera. So in the gangster days, I was trying to replicate the look of old Technicolor. So I had a brown stocking, and I lit it like old Technicolor movies. I used a slower stock, used harder light in those scenes, and then went from a brown stocking to a black stocking when the gangster life really hit off. And then I went for a cold look when he was in prison by using tungsten film, but shooting with daylight, but only correcting it halfway. And did that. And then when he meets Elijah Muhammad, I just went for a straight, clean, no filtration, just a clean, pure look, and did that. But then when he made his Hajj, I kept the clean look, but I used a diffusion filter to just soften the image a little bit more, just to kind of replicate how his whole attitude had softened. And Spike and I wanted to shoot it in 65 millimeter because right around that time, Lawrence of Arabia, the restored Lawrence of Arabia, came out. We went to the Ziegfeld Theater to see it, and we were like blown away. And yeah, the landscapes, but the great thing about Lawrence of Arabia were the close-ups, because the close-ups in 70 millimeter like this, you felt like he was really in front of you. And I wanted to do that with Malcolm. I wanted to put him right in front of everybody. Of course, we couldn't afford 65 millimeter. And when I started doing research, the problems were, okay, even if I did the best job I could shooting it the best way, the projection wasn't the way it was back in those days. The 70 millimeter projection could have ruined the whole experience. So I went with 35, and I went with a Super 185 frame, which was a little bit larger than the 185. And we shot it in 3 months. We shot it in Brooklyn. We shot it in New Jersey. Newark, New Jersey, where the prison scenes were. The exteriors of the prison was Rahway State Prison. And then we went to Cairo. And while I was in Cairo, I was getting all the responses to Juice, because Juice had just opened up in the United States while I was in Cairo, suffering from King Tut's revenge, and shooting that stuff. And that was an amazing thing.
That's a perfect segue to Juice. Okay. So let's look at that. So this is your, not transition, you directed as before Malcolm X, actually, but the first film that we see where you actually were the director.
Mm-hmm. Check this out. Oh, shit.
My second film as a director. It's kind of like a variation on The Most Dangerous Game, the famous story we all had to read in high school, at least I did anyway.
So how did that come about?
I was looking for I was looking for a film to do. And the agent that I had at the time wasn't finding material that I wanted to do. After Juice came out, I was getting sent stuff like a rap version of Alice in Wonderland called Yo Alice. And I was looking for a thriller. And so 2 films that I went out for were Seven and Surviving the Game. And I met on Seven. And when I met, when I went to meet with the producers, my agent said, look, they have no faith in this. They're getting ready to throw the script away. They think it's too bloody. They think it's too gory. And they're afraid to make the movie. So if you tell them how to make the movie, you can get the job. And so I had my film references, what I wanted it to look like and stuff. And it was a dark story. I mean, at that point, it was a script set in New York. I knew the writer Andy Walker, because he had been a PA on a film that I shot, a low-budget thriller in New York called Enemy Territory, and he was and worked in the art department there. And so he wrote the script on spec, and I went in to meet with the guys, and I told them. They said, well, how are you going to deal with the gore? I said, you're not going to show it. I said, the best thing you want to do is right when they're getting ready to open up the body bag, as soon as the zipper starts moving, you cut away. I said, it's best to set things up so that the audience imagines more than we show them. And I thought I had a great meeting, great conversation, told them how to do it, how I would do it. And then later on, my agent said I talked my way out of a job because I told them how to make the movie. And so they said, well, see, the movie can be made. We can get an A-list director. We can get, an A-list cast. And I made suggestions to them about how to cast it. They said, who would you cast in this? And I said, well, for the younger cop, I said, I like Johnny Depp. But I just saw this movie, Thelma and Louise, and there's this guy in there named Brad Pitt. And I said, and then what about the older cop? I said, let's make him African American. I said, maybe Lawrence Fishburne could do it. I suggested Lawrence Fishburne. And so my agent said I talked my way out of a job because I told them how to make the movie, but they weren't going to make the movie with me. And so, but it's a brilliant film anyway. So I got Surviving the Game. I had a great line producer, Fred Caruso, who had been a production manager on the Godfather films. And he's from Newark, New Jersey also. And so we made it for New Line. And we shot it in Wenatchee, Washington. And for the role of Mason, I wanted to get a brother in there. Because, one of the things I was trying to do was go after material that wasn't specifically written for African-American actors, but I was going to put some black folks in there. And so the first person I wanted to try and get was Lawrence Fishburne. I tried to get Lawrence Fishburne. New Line did not want Lawrence Fishburne because he did a movie called Deep Cover, which was a brilliant film, but they blamed him for the failure of the movie. Forget the fact they didn't know how to sell the thing. They didn't sell it right, but they blamed him. Who they wanted for the role of Mason was Charlie Sheen. I said, no. I said, no. So, okay. So the only person they would consider was Ice-T. Now, I had just seen Ice in the movie Trespass. I didn't think he did a good job as an actor in the first film he did, that Mario Van Peebles did, but I thought he did a really good job in Trespass. And I thought, well, maybe that'll be okay. Let's get Ice-T. And so I started to put together the rest of the cast. And I was able to get Rutger Hauer, which was amazing. Everybody, I got to tell you, everybody said, "Watch out for Rutger. He's trouble. He's a trouble guy." I met with Rutger for the first time. We talked for just 4 hours straight. He was so cool. He just didn't like bullshit. He just liked to be straight up and talk. And so I was able to get him. I was able to get F. Murray Abraham, who already won his Academy Award for Amadeus. And I got Charles Dutton, You know, so we got Charles Dutton to play in there, and then we got Gary Busey, who was crazy. and you know, we shot, you know, in Wenatchee, Washington, and that's a whole nother story. And I had a great production designer because there's a cabin that the guys stay in, and we actually built it. And Wenatchee, Washington is about a 4-hour drive away from Seattle, up in the Cascade Mountains. And, you know, we just did the best thing we could. It was crazy. It was just a lot of things that went wrong, because when I scouted the locations, you know, there's a scene where Ice-T is supposed to drop into a raging river. And so I scouted the locations, and the river was raging. By the time we got to shoot, there had been such low snowfall that by the time we got up there to shoot it, the river was no longer raging. So I had to use all kinds of trickery, you know, and actually wound up using 3 separate rivers to look like one to make it work. And you know, just a lot of problems dealing with it. You know, a lot of politics. But I'm proud of the movie, although we ran out of money, you know. I think at the end of the first week of shooting, F. Mary Abraham was driving himself home because we were in Wenatchee, Washington. The main location was an hour away from the hotel. It's dark as all get out at night in Wenatchee, Washington. And F. Mary Abraham decided to drive himself home that night. And it wound up saving his life, because if he had been driven, he would have been sitting on the passenger side. He drove through an intersection. His car came and just rammed him on the passenger side. The driver and another passenger of the other car was killed. The one passenger that survived had to be airlifted out. F. Mary Abraham, his face went into the steering wheel. He broke his hand. He had 3 broken ribs. And he had to come and work on this movie where there was no level ground, out in the country, woods, mountains, everything. And so we had to shoot the first couple of days using his stunt double. If you see the movie, you'll see F. Mary Abraham's character is always kind of like in the background with his goggles down, you know, but it's not him. I had to keep, you know, until he got out the hospital. And he did get out the hospital. His agent said, don't go back to work. Insurance will take care of it. Murray said, no, I've got to go back to work because I don't want to sit in a room and think that I almost died. I almost got killed. So he came to work, and he was on drugs. He was in pain. He was on painkillers. So he could do 1 or 2 takes, and he had to sit down and take a rest. And so we wound up losing time. My producer went back to New Line, tried to get more money to take care of that. They said, no, you know, actually, he went and talked, and Bob Shea said, if you're here to try and get some more money, you just get the fuck out of here right now. We had no support from the studio whatsoever. So, and the politics, I don't have time to go into, but there was a whole political thing between the producer, who's the producer of the film, his production company, and New Line. It was a partnership that started out amicably, but Surviving the Game was the last film of the partnership, and by that time, they were mortal enemies, dogging each other in the press every single day. I got the job. I didn't know anything about this. So why am I not getting any support? And that was the reason why. And so we ran out of money, and there were some scenes we had to do, action scenes we had to do where we could only do 1 take. And it was a tough shoot.
So speaking of, you just mentioned about 7 and bloody and so on. So we're gonna go to watch now Bones. So trigger warning now if you don't like horror.
This is a horror sequence.
Yeah. So
And it gets a little rough, but enjoy.
be warned.
I want to talk to Dan.
Oh no, this is
No.
no this. Okay, here it is.
There was another excerpt from Demon Knight, which we didn't have time to show as well, and I know you did also The Walking Dead and etc. So I'm wondering what attracts you to horror as a genre.
You know, it's it's the perfect surrealistic film going. You know, I love it. It's I'm not a gore. I'm not a gore hound, but gore is necessary sometimes. You know, for shock effect. And I had to. This was when this story. You know, Jimmy Bones was a gangster in the neighborhood. He was he was a gentleman gangster who got murdered because he didn't want to have the drug dealing in his neighborhood. And so he wound up being dead, but his ghost just inhabited the neighborhood for many years. And this is his resurrection. I had to make it as horrible as possible. And, you know, Snoop was just the best person to work with. He's a good brother. He's an old soul. And, you know, he was blunted every day. The one day I had to beg him, don't get blunted. The one day, that final shot of him walking up the fiery staircase, I promised him I would do that first thing in the morning so he could get that out of the way so he could just go back to the trailer and smoke his weed and chill for the rest of the day. But he was so good. And I had Snoop and I had Pam Grier. And Pam was amazing. And I got to tell you, one of the highlights of my life was seeing Snoop blush after he kissed Pam Grier. You know, and I guess I'm friends with I'm friends with Snoop lifelong because I fulfilled one of his dreams to kiss Pam Grier. You know, one of the ladies he grew up in love with, and she was great to work with too. You know, she looked great when we did this, and so this is '99, and I think. I mean, as a kid, I grew up going to see horror films. I like good horror films. And I really have a love for Italian horror, European horror, but especially Italian horror. So the whole maggot thing was kind of like a riff on Suspiria. Did you ever see Suspiria? Dario Argento's film when you know, the maggots. You know. I was trying to think of the most disgusting thing I could think of, and I hate maggots. And so... so, you know, doing that was really interesting. And we shot it in Vancouver, an unnamed city. And it was a good cast. And unfortunately, the studio didn't know how to market this one either. Because when we were, you know, they marketed, the only ads and posters that I saw were in the African-American neighborhoods. When we were in Vancouver, it was white kids that were mobbing Snoop, you know, who wanted his autograph, and he always had CDs that he could give away, you know, and he was perfect guy. He's an old soul, no doubt about it. And so, you know, we got good reviews, but nobody went to see the film. And heck, you know.
Well, the next one is very different. So this is Double Play.
Yeah,
This is a recent film you did.
This is my last film that I had shot, that I directed. Okay. So Double Play is, we shot it in 2015 on the island of Curacao. I've been going to Curacao since the mid-'80s. I worked with another director named Felix DeRoy, who I met at NYU Film School, and I shot 2 films for him on the island, and it became one of my favorite places, you know, great scuba diving and everything else. And so I started taking my wife there. And we were there for like Christmas and New Year's, 10-day holiday, and I'm taking pictures, we're having a wonderful time. And I said, "Damn, I'd love to shoot another movie on this island, but I don't know how that's ever going to happen." 4 months later, I got a script sent to me that was an adaptation of a script called Double Play by a great Cariceleño writer named Frank Martinez Arion. And this is a story set in 1973 in Curacao. And it's a story of love, marriage, adultery, revenge, murder, and suicide. It happens to come to a head between 4 friends playing dominoes on a hot summer Sunday in 1973. And so we put this movie together. It was funded entirely from the island. The book is unknown. Not too many people know about Curacao in America anyway. It's a former Dutch colony. Curacao got its independence in 2010. The book is well known in Europe. You got to read it in high school and college because he was a great Antillean writer. I never got to meet him because he passed away actually a week before I went down to start production on the film. And I was able to put together a really good cast. The American producer was a sister named Lisa Cortez, who recently did some really amazing documentaries. She did a Little Richard documentary that aired on HBO. And but she put this together, and it was also funded from the island. It premiered at Rotterdam in 2016, the Rotterdam Film Festival, and it's a movie I'm really proud of. I had a great cinematographer, Patrick Maguire from Mexico, and it's shot all with natural light. The only artificial light we used was in the night scenes. But during the day, I wanted him to really capture the feel of the light of Curacao. And I would recommend going. It's a beautiful island. There are flights from New York every day. They have an international airport. Yeah.
And you're not paid by any tourist agency to promote it?
No, but I love the island. Felix DeRoy, who was from there, I did a movie with him, 2 movies. One was Almacita de Desolato, another one was Ava and Gabrielle, and they were all set on Curacao. And I brought him in to be my production designer on this film because he was living in Curacao in 1973. I figured, hey, nobody knows things better than him. So, and he's an old friend, so it was just a good chance for us to work together again.
Yeah. So we've come to the last excerpt, and I was wondering, so this is from the Strange Justice, and from all the films and TV, and you didn't pick anything from my favorite series, The Wire, but
okay.
I'm just kidding.
No.
But I want you actually to set this up before we watch it, because it's really important for people to know.
Strange Justice was a movie that I did for Showtime. It is adapted from a book by Jane Mayer. It is the actual inside story of the Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill thing. And I was able to get Delroy Lindo to play Clarence Thomas and Regina Taylor to play Anita Hill. And it's a pretty one-on-one, the book tells you everything that you didn't know about what was going on during that time. That a lot of people didn't know. The fact that there were several other women who were ready to corroborate everything that Anita Hill said. They were in hotels, but they never got to testify. And just so many things that happened. But the thing about the script, I had a relationship with Showtime where they actually gave me quite a bit of freedom to try some things. And so the script, when it got into the actual Senate hearings, it was pretty much just a one-on-one, a recreation of the Senate hearings. And if you remember, and those of you that remember it, watching on television, it was kind of like very neutral. Clarence Thomas he maintained an even strain. Anita Hill, same thing. There was no emotion in anything that they said. And so I, was thinking, there's got to be a better way to do this than just a straight recreation of this. And it came out of the idea that I was trying to figure out, how do I recreate the Senate hearing room? Because we shot this in Toronto. I'm looking at locations for, that could be the Senate hearing. And no, I can't, none of these is working. So I came up with the idea, well, what if we start in a Senate hearing room, but it becomes someplace else? What if, when Clarence Thomas takes the oath, the room goes away, and everybody in the room becomes silhouettes, except for Clarence Thomas. Even the senators. It saved me from having to try and find somebody who looked like Joe Biden, or Ted Kennedy, But the whole room goes away. Everybody else becomes silhouettes, and I told the actors, okay, you studied these guys, you study these people. I want you, all the emotion that you know that they were keeping inside, I want you to just let it out while we're in this situation. So when he's sworn in, and you'll see this, the room goes away and becomes like this surreal psycho space. And he's able to do that. And Regina Taylor playing Anita Hill did the same thing. But whenever we show people watching it on television, it's what we all remember seeing. I did a one-on-one recreation of that. It's just very boring video photography. But we're inside the room. I wanted them to just, just improvise the feelings and just go to town with it. And for me, it was a lesson in acting because two actors having different approaches to doing the same thing. I'm asking them to improvise within a structure. I guess it's kind of like visual jazz. I created a structure, and I wanted them to improvise within that structure. Delroy Lindo was used to having rehearsals, and a lot of time. We didn't have time to give him rehearsals. The best thing we could do was send him down to Pinpoint, Georgia, where Clarence Thomas grew up, so he got a chance to feel what Clarence Thomas's upbringing must have been like. So that's all he was able to get. And Delroy, I'll let you see this, and then I'll go further after you check it out, because this show won me a Peabody Award. So he was lying. he was lying all the way through, because in the book you find out that, and we actually had it in the movie. They found the video store that he bought his pornography, that he rented his porno from. Turned out everybody knew that Clarence Thomas was an aficionado of pornography. And in college, he had Hustler magazine and Numerical Order, it had a whole library, Hustler magazine, and he was a pornography. And so the other women were supposed to actually corroborate, because, he made advances to them too. But the thing was that the Democrats were really afraid to go after him because they didn't want to appear to be racist. And so now we're stuck with him. So that's how that started. And so Delroy was interesting because, he's 180 degrees from Clarence Thomas. And he was doing a brilliant job, but he didn't trust himself. And I made sure that he and Regina Taylor, even though they knew each other, I made sure that they had no contact with each other at all while we were shooting. He completed his stuff, and I think on the last day when he was going out and she was coming in, they just passed each other in the hallway, and that was it. And she said, "Hey, do I have any time to rehearse this?" I said, "I have no rehearsal time. You just got to go for it." And she said, "Okay," and she did. And so for me, that was the only way to really heighten the drama of the situation, but actually try and get inside the way they were really feeling. And Delroy, there's another scene where he does it because, he was talking about how he's wearing the suit, and he said, "Well, this is kind of like the uniform of this, can I just take it off?" I said, "Yeah, do it." Because I was letting him really invent the interior character of Clarence Thomas. And when so in a later scene, when he took his suit jacket off, and he said, this Supreme Court is not worth it. He actually tore his shirt off, but he left the tie on. His tie was on, and he said, "This is nothing but a high-tech lynching." And he grabbed the tie, and he made it like a hangman's noose, And I'm like sitting behind the monitor, I'm saying, yeah. And I say, "Cut." And he'd say, "I don't know what the fuck I'm doing." He said, "Ernest, this is ridiculous. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, man." I said, "Come on, man." And I talked to him. I said, "Come on, we talked about this. What must have been going on in Clarence Thomas's head, so just go with it, And I talked to him. Okay, let's do take two, and he sat down. I said, "Action." And he didn't move. And I said, "Action." And he didn't move. And I said, "Okay, let me see what happens." And he sat there and he looked back at the room, and then he got into it and actually did a brilliant job. And later on, I said, "Why? What was it when you look back?" He said, I realized I had no friends in the room. And so it was interesting because during that time, he treated the production assistants pretty bad. The second assistant director, he was kind of mean to them. And like I said, he would just blow up with me because he didn't trust, he was doing a brilliant job, but he didn't trust it because it was something he was unused to doing. Whereas Regina, she didn't have a problem with it. She just, jumped right into it. Later on, after it was done, after we were finished, Delroy called me and he said, man, I'm sorry, I know I was an asshole. He said, but I was coming from fear. He said, I was scared to death all the time I was doing this because I never had to do that before. And I said, man, but you did a brilliant job. And I said, okay, yeah, but what mattered is that you got there. And, as a director, I found out, that what John Huston said, 85% of directing is casting. And that's so true. You get the right cast as a director, all I got to do is sit back, maybe make minor adjustments here and there, but you get that cast. And to me, casting is probably the most nerve-wracking part of putting a film together because it's like you're going at it for weeks and weeks and weeks, and I'm not finding that person, I'm not finding that person. It was the same way with double play because I was asking American actors to play Curaçaleños, the people of Curacao. And they don't have the same mannerisms as, African-American women. And we were going to shoot the movie in English. So we were casting in the United States and we were casting in the UK as well. And I was able to come up with a great cast, but it was murder getting there.
Thank you, Ernest. I hope you all got a sense of the amazing range of different work that you've done, which is really, really amazing. And we didn't even cover the TV that you did, and so many other things, and music.
You'd have to have me here for 2 weeks.
Yeah. So it's cold in here, I think, and we have a reception. So Ernest is here. You can talk to him, asking questions rather than passing around microphones. I hope you enjoyed this session, and thank you, Ernest.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming.